That's cool. Subnautica 2. Very nice, very nice. Anyway, let's see here. Voodoo Kid. Now that's what I'm talking about. Hello, you may not know me, but please do allow me to explain my relationship with point-and-click adventure games. It's not a deep connection by any means, built on decades of trust and commitment. I mean, I didn't even get into the genre until I was in my 20s, but as soon as I played my first few, I was hooked. I thoroughly enjoyed the challenging puzzles, the amazing visuals and artwork, the emphasis on dialogue that could be witty or clever or both, the range of characters, environments and stories, and so much more. So yeah, I was in my early 20s when I picked up my first point-and-click adventure, which means, unlike a lot of die-hard fans, I didn't directly experience the origins in the 80s or its peak in the 90s, but through the oh-so-wonderful internet and platforms like Steam and GOG, I have gained an immense amount of respect and admiration. I've gone down many a rabbit hole and can now piece together how the genre peaked, died, and how it has kind of started to wiggle its way back like a worm that isn't quite sure where its home is. Since discovering point-and-clicks, I have played through respected cult classics like Monkey Island and Grim Fandango, but I have also stumbled upon the lesser-known and bizarre. And we all love the bizarre.
Help me, young fellow, me lad. You're my only hope. You must learn the ways of the cube if you're to come with me to save the old man. Your grandfather's being held prisoner in the South Pole by a despicable creature they call Dr. Chillblain.
Many of my favourites are actually from after the peak of the genre, such as The Longest Journey, Edna and Harvey, The Book of Unwritten Tales, and Syberia. And I love browsing and finding random stuff as well, like this one game I got that was on sale for 25p. 25 pence. No matter what though, I have come away from every single point-and-click adventure game with something positive to say. I have always had fun. And fun...
F is for friends.
Fun matters when it comes to playing games. In my opinion, at least. And sure, sometimes you have to click the exact right pixel to pick up an object. And sure, sometimes the puzzles can be excruciatingly difficult and not make any sense and require a silly amount of brain power and out-of-the-box thinking, but the difficulty and ridiculousness of these kinds of puzzles is exactly why they stick in your mind. You get this ah-ha-ha-ha, you got me, or hallelujah feeling after you eventually figure it out. Which means that moment isn't going to leave your brain anytime soon. Alongside the puzzles, there are so many unique graphical styles, and I personally love the look of 2D just as much as 3D. I love third-person perspective just as much as first-person. I love the gritty and scary just as much as the light, comedic and cartoony. The truth is, what is there not to love?
I respect and love this citizen dearly.
Oh, that's very kind, citizen. I love you too.
Now, if you haven't played a point-and-click before, it's okay, I forgive you. The genre itself is essentially explained in the name. You point and click with your mouse to progress through the adventure, although some are playable with controllers now. Commonly, you click to move your character through the environment and click to interact with interesting objects and to solve puzzles. When I looked into the history, it was abundantly clear how influential so many of the games were, and it further expanded my feeling of respect. However, the genre hasn't been at the forefront of the industry for a very long time, and that makes me sad, because this genre should matter just as much as any other. So in an attempt to prove to you the value of the genre, I'm going to go by decade. I'll explain the history I've researched, whilst also giving you some of my personal opinions of games I have played and my experiences. Realistically, I couldn't get to every single game, but I have tried to share a range of popular and less popular titles. And overall, I am simply here to show you why point-and-click adventure games should never die. So the 80s was quite important for gaming, in a few ways, you know. Origins of point-and-clicks lie in text adventures with games like Colossal Cave Adventure, Zork and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but they required patience, and after some time it's natural they had to evolve in some way. So, visuals came in, particularly the addition of illustrations alongside text in games like The Pawn and The Hobbit. I can't help but think of the 2003 one though. Most importantly, Mystery House released in 1980, which was the first true graphical adventure with renders for every scene. Mystery House was developed by Roberta and Ken Williams, who would later form Online Systems, which would then become Sierra Online. In an interview, Ken Williams states that he only coded Mystery House to please Roberta and never expected it to be a hit. So, this is your sign to code games only for love. The year 1984 brought the Apple Macintosh and the release of Enchanted Scepters, which is credited as the first ever point-and-click adventure game, and it made great use of the new invention, the mouse. Perfect for pointing and clicking. 1985 saw the release of the Mac Venture Engine, which was written for the game Deja Vu: A Nightmare Comes True. The lack of keyboard input needed for this game set it apart from the standard at the time, which was praised in an issue of Macworld. Later, the Mac Venture Engine was also used for Uninvited, Shadowgate and Deja Vu 2. In 1980, Sierra had also released The Wizard and the Princess, but more notably in 1984, they had released King's Quest. King's Quest truly brought the adventure genre to life, with 16 colour graphics, direct control of the character, and interactive scenery. Thus, here was the rise of Sierra Online. They were absolutely pivotal to the growth of the genre, with a lot of quests, and sequels to those quests. King's Quest, Space Quest, Police Quest, Quest for Glory. Sierra were clearly on a quest themselves. These games still required entering text commands like look at that thing, or go over there, steal the violin, that sort of thing. Ken Williams stated, "I saw Sierra as a leader and it was our job to show the industry where to go. When Sierra started, there was nothing but pioneering to be done." King's Quest is said to be commonly considered the progenitor of third-person perspective adventure games. Very nice. It also saved Sierra from the video game crash of 1983. Even nicer. King's Quest was revolutionary. It created a whole new type of adventure for people, one where you can accidentally fall into a river and get eaten by crocodiles. Not saying I did that, or anything, of course. Ken Williams also said Roberta always insisted on somehow doing some technical innovation every game, and she would drive the technology. She deliberately designed games so that they had a broad reach. Each game had some reason to exist. Another release from Sierra is Leisure Suit Larry. Now, I must admit, I find this era of gaming in general very difficult. You may say, but you can look up the answers online. Shh. I'm stubborn, okay? I much prefer not to look up solutions, and at most I'll use the spoiler-free ones on UHS hints. I don't care if I'm in a game double the amount of time I should be, I'll get through it myself like my life depends on it. That means I've gotten stuck and died numerous times on the first Leisure Suit Larry. Even answering the questions correctly to start the game is a challenge in of itself. And I can see why there was a lot of conflicting opinions when this game released, with its adult content and all. The world hadn't quite seen anything like it, but I think that's one of the reasons it became a critical and commercial success. And it also has many sequels. To be honest, a lot of point-and-clicks have sequels, but I won't mention them all because this video would be a million times longer. So that was Sierra Online, but of course after some time there came competition, which was none other than Lucasfilm Games, which, Lucasfilm behind Star Wars. In 1986 we get their first adventure game, Labyrinth, based on the film Labyrinth, directed by Jim Henson. I don't think it was majorly successful, but then, in 1987, Lucasfilm Games developed a game engine, Scum, for Maniac Mansion. Said by Gary Winnick in this LucasArts Classic Adventures manual, Ron Gilbert created Scum, a high-level programming language and system which would be capable of allowing the type of graphic story presentation we envisioned. The designers were frustrated by text-driven adventures and wanted to push graphics to the forefront. No surprise there, humans do like to look at things. It had a much more intuitive interface as a result, and it also sprinkled in humour, which made it an extra fun experience. Truth be told, before this video I had never experienced the game myself, but even within the first 10 minutes of playing the 1989 enhanced version, I could really sense why it became a classic. To finish off the 80s, LucasArts released Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders in 1988, and also Indiana Jones and Last Crusade in 1989, which was a sizable hit and introduced dialogue choices. It's impressive how in such a short space of time, so much was achieved. And you may be someone who yearns over this decade, and I do very much understand. But now transitioning into the 90s, I think it's clear why this decade should get some love as well. Well, I have no idea where I am. Bring on the 90s. This is a decade I am way more knowledgeable about, truth be told, and it was truly so exciting, and not just because I was born in the middle of it. 1990 saw the release of Loom, which was praised and called a work of storytelling art. With music notes instead of verbs to select, Loom is indeed beautiful and seemingly quite underrated, because it was overshadowed by none other than The Secret of Monkey Island, created by Ron Gilbert with Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman by his side. If you know anything about point-and-click adventures, then you will likely know the Monkey Island series. With its many iconic moments and humour, this pirate game set a new benchmark, and was also the beginning of adventure games moving away from requiring text input and the possibility of death at every corner. The design and music especially stands out to me. Just listen to this. I also played the 2009 special edition with my dad some years ago, and it was a blast. We got stuck a few times, but we had fun, and we distributed the feelings of stupidity between us. Initial sales of The Secret of Monkey Island were slow, but it had clearly left a big impression. The sequel, Monkey Island 2: LeChuck's Revenge, released in 1991. At this point, Lucasfilm Games had merged with Industrial Light and Magic and Skywalker Sound and was renamed LucasArts. And Monkey Island 2 ended up being even more well received than the first game, for a plethora of reasons. It utilised the iMuse system, which seamlessly blended location music between scenes. The backdrops were hand-drawn and then digitally scanned, resulting in this beautifully detailed look. This magazine even says it's horribly close to being a perfect game. It sets the standard for future graphic adventures in the same way the original Monkey Island did. So surely the future of adventure games seemed bright. Something of note is that Ron Gilbert left LucasArts after Monkey Island 2 and co-founded Humongous Entertainment, who were behind Putt Putt, Pajama Sam, Freddy Fish and Spy Fox. Aimed more at children, the simple point-and-click gameplay paired with the charming and fun stories and animation meant Humongous Entertainment's games were in fact a huge success, and a nostalgic joy for many people. Watch my edutainment video for more information. All of this makes me think about how much the 90s called for experimentation, especially with graphics and sound. The game Countdown, for example, was praised for both, and it had a highly cinematic atmosphere when it came out. It utilised real sound, which equaled realistic audio and speech without needing any additional hardware, so you could hear this scream in its full glory. In 1991, on Sierra's side, they'd published The Adventures of Willy Beamish, which despite its cartoony appearance, has quite a lot of adult humour. There's a frog named Horny, for example. The game has traditional cell animation, hand-painted backgrounds and fully animated cutscenes, and it has this Saturday morning cartoon feel. Look at the depth these rooms have, by the way, and how cute this dog is. Ah. Willy Beamish was created by a subsidiary company of Sierra called Dynamix, and they also made Heart of China and Rise of the Dragon. Cocktail Vision, behind the Goblins series and this Woodruff game, were also a subsidiary of Sierra, and eventually they merged into Mindscape, who were behind Lego Island.
Wait, cool.
Sierra themselves were still developing adventure games, of course, including The Colonel's Bequest, Freddy Farkas, Torin's Passage, and Phantasmagoria, which is jointly labelled as an interactive movie, which were growing in popularity during this time, especially due to the release of the CD-ROM, which held way more space than the previously used floppy disk. Now, as much as I would like to, I'm not gonna go into interactive movie FMV games that much, it kind of deserves a video on its own. It's also worth noting the seventh guest from Trilobite, which also helped popularise CD-ROMs at the time. The look of games like this still freaks me out to this day. I guess in a sense you can see the people are real, but it feels uncanny or fake, even the non-horror ones, I don't know. Placing real people inside a game with this 90s quality, it's like this weird nightmare you're part of, like they shouldn't really be there. There's Ripper starring Christopher Walken and Frankenstein Through the Eyes of the Monster with Tim Curry. It's a shame this kind of style isn't really done anymore, you know? In a similar vein, there's also Cyberfix's games, Titanic Adventure Out of Time and Dust: A Tale of the Wild West, where instead of video they used scans of actors and overlaid facial movements. It's again uncanny but also quite cool. I think stylistically it's rather eccentric, but in a good way.
Evening, I'm the lift attendant, and you'll not find one better at taking you where you want to go.
Let's reverse back to the year 1991 when Cruise for a Corpse released. Instead of a command menu, the cursor in this game changed appearance when hovering over objects of interest. Would I make a video on the design of video game cursors? Probably. In 1992, the company behind Lara Croft, Core Design, released their first attempt at a point-and-click adventure, Curse of Enchantia, which went down an experimental route with no on-screen text or object descriptions. Additionally, it had some surreal puzzles that were criticised for being illogical. When I was getting footage, I got stuck right at the beginning. So yeah, either I have no brain cells or it's simply not that intuitive. But you know, there's a certain kind of effort that has to be put behind puzzles that don't make sense, I guess. In any case, the game was at least praised for its graphics. Something Dark Seed was also praised for. Ah, Dark Seed. HR Giga, the game. Atmosphere, the game. It features incredible artwork, and HR Giga himself requested his paintings to be in 640 by 350 resolution. And frankly, there is this unnerving feel about it. There's something to be said about borders as well, a rarity in gaming. The border around this adds so much to the presentation, and it kind of reminds me of games on the PC-98 as well. It's just a shame Darkseid 1 and 2 aren't easy to buy, and I'm rather surprised actually. You know, just because they're older doesn't mean they're not effective as horror, similar to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is labelled as psychological, disturbing yet compelling. There's also Harvester, reviewed less well at the time, but it is known for its gore and violence. Point and click plus horror can certainly be nightmarish.
My stars, that was exciting.
Now 1993 was a year. We got the sequel to Maniac Mansion, Day of the Tentacle, which was inspired by Chuck Jones cartoons. It's a cult classic time-travelling comedy and received a lot of praise for being entertaining, visually appealing, and light years ahead of the original. Also, audiences liked the removal of character death, which I understand. Dying sucks. It was also the first adventure game to offer spoken parts for nearly every action. There are 4,500 spoken lines in the game, a monstrous design, production and acting task. Yeah, it was certainly a huge leap, and rightfully praised. Sam and Max Hit the Road is also a humorous treat from 1993. Based on comic characters by Steve Purcell, the all-around wackiness makes this one hard to ignore. The game also introduced an inventory system accessible by hovering over the bottom of the screen, which cleared space for the stupendous visuals. What I love about point and clicks is also the fact that you are often picking up and essentially stealing items from all over the place. Additionally, sometimes you combine items in the strangest ways that don't make any logical sense. It's just kind of funny, you know. But when there's bizarre item combinations, plus witty writing, clever timing, good puzzles, art and animations, can't you see how it's such a great style of game to turn to when you're perhaps feeling a bit low? Good comedy, to me, is pretty hard to find in games, but certain point and clicks nailed it. take the cult classic fantasy comedy Discworld from 1994 based on the Terry Pratchett novels. British humour from this era has such a special place in my heart, so it's a shame this game isn't easily accessible. This one certainly proves that point-and-click puzzles can be, you know, sometimes a bit illogical and frustrating. As mentioned in this Retro Gamer issue, Britain in particular has given the world more than its fair share of hard-as-nails gaming gauntlets. I apologise on behalf of Britain for all of the annoyance this game must have caused. Back to 1993, we can't forget Myst. Myst, the world's best-selling PC game up until The Sims, a game I played whilst making this video. I have a sweet spot for the pre-rendered ultra-realistic, for the time, graphics which relied heavily on the fresh CD-ROM technology. Now, is this game easy? No. At least for me and my decreasing level of brain power as I age. But is it immersive and cool? Yes. Did I manage to finish it? Not quite yet, but almost. I'm right at the end. But thinking back to the beginning, you really are dropped straight into the world and there's nothing particularly holding your hand as you explore. You only possess crippling worry if you're ever going to progress at all. Once you get the hang of how the game works though, it does get a bit easier. Although this underground submarine bit is certainly, as someone on Reddit says, obtuse. I got there in the end, as you can see by my saved game name. Myst brought this combination of beauty and mystery paired with extreme satisfaction from aaah moments. It introduced a whole new formula to the genre, and with there being no interface, it's still extremely immersive to this day. It also spawned a successful sequel, Riven, in 1997. And it also spawned many copycat and parody games like Pissed. I mean, here's an iceberg I found on Reddit if you're interested in more. I know Rem is quite popular from 2002 and Quern from 2016. The fact that Myst-like is technically a sub-genre shows how big of an impact it really had. It's also worth mentioning that both Simon the Sorcerer and Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers, both released in 1993 as well. See? I told you it was a year. Simon the Sorcerer was made by 15 people, a game that parodies popular fairy tales and has lovely hand-drawn, digitally coloured art. As time-consuming as it is, hand-drawn artwork for video games never misses. I want to tear every single scene out from the screen and put it up in a museum. Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers was another title from Sierra Online, created by Jane Jensen. Unfortunately, it didn't sell all that well, but it received a tremendous amount of praise. Computer Gaming World issue 112 says, Gabriel Knight is an exceptional blend of art, game and understanding. It offers an adult and refreshing perspective. Gabriel Knight is that rarity in computer games, a work that is artistic enough to convey a message and present realistic characters so that the player really cares. So I suppose the themes used in video games were really expanding. Cyberpunk had also become a big thing too throughout the 80s and 90s, as explained in my video here, another shameless self-plug, wink wink. It's no surprise that Blade Runner itself got an adventure game, and the imagery in particular is absolutely glorious. I could sit and look at this all day. I also want to play Nightlong Union City Conspiracy. I adore how this one looks as well. There's also Bloodnet and Hell, a cyberpunk thriller, which I assume is cyberpunk because of the word cyberpunk in the name. And from 1994 specifically, we have Dreamweb and Beneath a Steel Sky. Dreamweb uniquely has a top-down view and features brief full frontal nudity, which I bet shocked the world to its core. Also, does anyone think this music is so cool? And Beneath a Steel Sky, free on Steam by the way, has art direction by Dave Gibbons. I started playing it and died straight away. But you know, I'll certainly remember my experience for years to come. It sold well and also won awards like Best Dialogue and Best Adventure, and that's exactly what humans need, right? Adventure. And how much more adventurous can you get than playing as a cool motorcycle gang leader? It's everyone's childhood dream, of course. This is about Full Throttle, which I have played the remastered version of. Full Throttle was Tim Schafer's, from LucasArts, first attempt as a project lead writer and designer, and this game ended up selling over 1 million copies, which was unexpected. I imagine. Now personally, truth be told, this one didn't stick in my mind as much as some other point-and-click games I've played, but I can see why it is a cult classic. It was also labelled as an ideal starter game for those not comfortable with complex puzzles, which is good because if every game was as illogical as Discworld, there may have been trouble. LucasArts also released their ambitious title The Dig in 1995, this darker, toned sci-fi adventure. The environments have these wonderful colour palettes, but it had way more of an adult tone, which isn't a bad thing of course, but people weren't too sure what to make of it. What I do personally like though is that a lot of these games aren't too long. Well, depending on how stuck you get, I suppose. Sierra and LucasArts had dominated the genre, but frankly the market for point and clicks at this point was dying. However, that meant more European developers came forward and the indie scene started to rise, which equaled in some interesting and solid titles from the mid-90s onwards. Hooray, we've made it to my birth year, 1996. The British developer behind Beneath the Steel Sky and also Lure of the Temptress came forward with the beginning of the Broken Sword series. It's theatrical and fun, rich in mystery and intrigue, and also has a lot of praise for its musical score and creative way of storytelling. You know, music enhances mood, adds atmosphere, and frankly you may be sitting listening to it for a while if you get stuck. Broken Sword was praised and popular, and it's one I enjoyed, but from the same year we also have Normality, and this one took me double the average time to complete. The real-time 3D environment was quite unconventional and impressive, and I think it's really fun to look at. I love it. Edge issue 33 even says that it makes the experience more immersive and travelling less tedious. And surprisingly, recently it got a big box release. I can imagine some indie developer now using the cutscenes, environments, characters and even the text for inspiration. Toonstruck is another game which design could serve as huge inspiration for game developers now, although hiring Christopher Lloyd may be tricky. The fact Christopher Lloyd is in this game to begin with is absolutely sensational. These environments are insanely fun to look at and click around. Even when you're frustrated or stuck, it feels like you're in a nostalgic childhood cartoon. However, it did cost $8 million to make and was a financial failure, meaning no sequel. But clearly experimentation was through the roof. The Last Express from 1997 was hand-coloured over an insane amount of black and white stills. I know it's not necessarily loved by all, but I do really like rotoscoped animation. The game also operates in real time, and failing to achieve objectives can equal unsolved mysteries. But with the way the game looks, the setting, the characters, the animation, you really do feel like you're riding on this train. I find first-person views so immersive, sometimes even to the point where I feel a bit scared and creeped out. Dunno, I get sucked in so much that I feel like I'm just in a completely different world. Speaking about a different world, or a different planet more so, how about some games with aliens? The Feeble Files and the Spacebar are perhaps lesser known, but they both have a great style and comedy. The developers behind Simon the Sorcerer, in fact, were also behind the Feeble Files, and it certainly has this British tone. It looks and feels nostalgic, it's charming, funny, and just deserves more of a spotlight. The Spacebar surprisingly features famous voices including Alan Rickman and John DiMaggio, so it's unfortunate it was a flop mostly due to the time limit mechanic. Otherwise, I've read it was a pretty decent and quirky game. And that's what I love about making videos like this, just finding the quirky stuff. I like quirky. Hereafter, the 90s would continue to see interesting titles. MPS Labs released Rex Nebula, Return of the Phantom, and Dragonsphere, all with good reviews. 9, The Last Resort is a game produced by Robert De Niro of all people, and it was an expensive flop, and the company's only game. And I would also like to mention Clock Tower, which surprisingly for a Japanese survival horror title used traditional point-and-click controls. It's another difficult one, but it was very influential. LucasArts released The Curse of Monkey Island in 1997, the last LucasArts game to use the SCUM engine, as the rise of 3D was now in full swing. Oh, how fast the industry develops. Computer Games World magazine says Curse of Monkey Island provides a case study in how to do things right. So it's no wonder this one is warmly nostalgic and still loved by many. But even so, this was nearing the end of LucasArts' development of adventure games. But they squeezed out Grim Fandango in 1998. It is certainly widely agreed upon now that this game is underrated. I mean, during the time it was highly acclaimed. I mean, sure, it was tricky, but many adventure games were. I played the remastered version with my dad back in 2020 and we adored it. We laugh about when we got stuck for hours on end, you know. Grim Fandango is brilliant in so many ways. It even tied for Best Adventure in Computer Game Adventure Magazine with Sanitarium, an isometric point-and-click horror with this absolutely sick cover. The producer at the time said the whole point of this game is to freak you out, and it's actually the first one I've ever come across that really does it. And that's why I said, God, we've got to pick this one up. I really enjoyed Sanitarium. It's trippy in some places, but overall it's really not a game you easily forget about. 1998 was also the start of the Nancy Drew series, and many games then released in the 2000s. It was one of the first mystery computer games to target a young female demographic, which, you know, I very much appreciate. Over the years they kept this pre-rendered style, which I absolutely cherish. Some of these scenes I would lovingly stick to my wall, and I remember seeing physical copies of the series in supermarkets growing up. You know, now I wish I'd gotten them all. And to finally finish off the 90s, from 1999 we have The Longest Journey, one of, if not my absolute favourite point and click from the Norwegian studio Funcom. Someone on Steam said that this game has a distinct flavour, and I totally agree. I love the series as a whole, but the first game has an intriguing atmosphere featuring shifting parallel worlds, a strong female protagonist and unique landscapes. And like this magazine article says, as is true in all the best games, it's quite clear that the designers, artists, musicians and programmers poured their hearts and souls into this game, and what emerges is not just a great game, but a work of art. The locations feel so mystical and dreamlike, you know, and for me, this game was a true eye-opener to how wonderful the genre could be. On to the 2000s! I'm going to throw a curveball into the mix. Daria's Inferno, based on the animated series. Were you expecting that? Do you know about this game? Unfortunately, it was reviewed quite negatively, and in terms of it being a point and click, it's very simple. But I wanted to mention it because I like Daria. Truth be told, even with some solid releases over this decade, you can sense how the popularity of the genre was still on a downward trend. To begin with, the fourth Monkey Island, Escape from Monkey Island, ditched traditional point-and-click controls, and experimented with bold 3D graphics. I personally like the pure 2000s look, but this was indeed the last adventure game LucasArts made. So yeah, by this point, LucasArts and Sierra had fizzled out in the point-and-click world, leaving indie and European developers to take the lead. The year 2000 brought lesser-known titles like Stupid Invaders, based off the French animated series Space Goofs.
You are going to die, and you're going to scream while you die, and then you will be dead.
Also Necronomicon: The Dawning of Darkness and The New Adventures of the Time Machine, which apparently tested players' patience. A game that tested my patience a little bit was The Mystery of the Druids from 2001. It is one of the more random point and clicks I've played, and fun fact, I was actually playing it when my first video released on this channel. It is fairly strange, and the game did receive quite a bit of criticism, but if anything, it was seen by the company as a huge learning experience. You know, it takes courage to release a game to begin with, so I respect that they wanted to learn from their mistakes. I love old CGI dearly, but this intro does make me laugh. The developers House of Tales went on to make The Moment of Silence, Overclocked: A History of Violence, and 15 Days. Also in 2001, Pendulo Studios released Runaway, a road adventure. Now, I enjoyed a couple of Pendulo's games, but they have recently ceased operations, which sucks, especially as they were also the longest running Spanish video game company and made games like Black Sad Under the Skin and Vertigo. On a more positive note, 2002 brought the release of Syberia, one of my favourites from Benoit Sokal. Syberia was an amazing addition to the gaming world as a whole, and it rightfully received a lot of praise, especially with its distinctive combination of Art Nouveau and steampunk. It's a must-play, in my opinion. The colour palette, the pre-rendered backgrounds, the cutscenes, it's got 90s, early 2000s written all over it, and to me that feels like home. It's worth noting that Benoit Socal also founded Whitebirds Productions, but unfortunately they were only able to release 3 PC games, Paradise, Sinking Island, and Nikopol Secrets of the Immortals, before being shut down due to financial issues. On a side note though, I want to point out framing and camera angles and how visually appealing they can be. Scenes can be framed in such unique ways, clever ways, like looking through the arcade machine in Toonstruck. And the way you transition from one place to the next, it makes me feel so much anticipation. When the game is in first person, the environment surrounds you from all angles and it's simply so immersive. For example, the Lovecraftian darkness within one In Pursuit of Loath Norda, the 2006 game Scratches, and also Outcry the Dawn, which is seemingly getting a remake this year. Also, Barrow Hill is one from the devs Shadow Tour Studios. I like this review on Steam. Pick up a copy, turn out the lights, and get yourself some quality heebie-jeebie time. The ghostly and unsettling game Darkfall the Journal succeeds when it comes to immersion and suspense. It's the kind of game where you turn off the lights and raise your stress levels.
It's whispering my name. It knows my name. I've got to open the door. I've got to open the door.
This is from Jonathan Boakes, who is the founder of Darkling Room behind The Lost Crown and The Last Crown, both of which have this cool black and white style with specific coloured parts that pop. Keops Studio also had a lot of releases in the 2000s, including Nostradamus The Last Prophecy, which is another game I was playing whilst making my first video. They also made Return to Mysterious Island, Echo Secrets of the Lost Cavern, and Voyage Journey to the Moon, which I found disgustingly difficult, by the way, but I beat it. Somehow. Also, what is it with some older games just not working properly? This graphical glitch jump scared me, this game's audio kept cutting out, and Mysterious Island, went kind of weird. Anyway. Dreamcatcher Interactive published a handful of the games I've mentioned already, but also Dracula Resurrection, which I've been wanting to play for a while. Perhaps this October I'll rise to the challenge. Additionally, the Adventure Company was a publishing division under Dreamcatcher Interactive, and I was not surprised to see their name pop up quite a few times as well. They worked with Keops Studio, but also Microids, THQ, and Cryo Interactive, from which I've played Salambo Battle for Carthage, which was a very random pick from my Steam library one fine week in 2022. Cryo Interactive also published this Ring game in Europe, which mainly received negative reviews. Well, you know, you can't appreciate the good without the bad. One game that is good is The Black Mirror. The dark and ominous atmosphere makes it a perfect choice to play around Halloween, which is exactly what I did. The vibes were immaculate. You know, I can't quite explain the feeling I got when standing outside the manor here. The game is from a small Czech team, and they also released games like Nibiru Age of Secrets and Next Life, but funnily enough, not Black Mirror 2 and 3, which were made by Cranberry Production. As you can see, 3D games had kind of taken over by this point. But Amanita Design, also a Czech developer, released the short surreal game Samarost in 2003, which just proves the level of creativity you can achieve when making video games. Imagination has no limit. Amanita Design also went on to create Botanicula, Happy Game, Chichel, and Machinarium. I was also playing Machinarium recently, and the artwork stunned me. Every scene I had to stop to truly take it all in. I adore the pencil and I love how it's got robots. I really love robots. Jumping to 2005 now, Bone Out from Boneville released the first episodic adventure game from none other than Telltale Games, whose fate we don't discuss, but it's worth pointing out that alongside the Bone series they also made adventure games for Wallace and Gromit, Sam and Max, Monkey Island, Batman, Borderlands, Back to the Future, and of course their biggest title, The Walking Dead. Many of their games have an episodic structure, and Telltale placed more importance on the choices you make. They diverged from the standard point-and-click gameplay, but in terms of adventure games, I really like their stuff. If it wasn't clear by now though, I really like media from the 2000s, probably because that's when I grew up. I really like the style of Still Life, for example, the sequel to the game Postmortem. Similar to The Black Mirror and Syberia, Still Life is played from a third-person perspective, and there's something about these particular 3D 2000s third-person point-and-click adventure games that I find very engrossing. They make me feel calm. Similarly, there's Keepsake and also something a bit random, Culpari Natter, which again was one of my I don't know what this is, but I'll give it a shot picks. It's got quite an interesting concept, unique mechanics, and even different endings. This is one I think is worth trying if you're into the genre. The crazy thing is that a lot of these solid and very decent point and clicks aren't that expensive, especially if they're on sale, like the one I got for 25 pence. Like I mentioned, at this point, European studios were very much driving the genre. This includes the German Deck 13 behind Ank and Jack Keen, and the German Daedalic Entertainment, who I can confidently say is one of the developers that got me into the genre more, although the current status of this developer is yet another unfortunate story. However, derived from the co-founders' university project, we have Daedalic's first game, Edna and Harvey the Breakout. Both the first and second game are great, and there are so many reasons why Edna and Harvey is one of my favourite point-and-click series. There is this stark contrast between the bright cartoony graphics and the overall tone and story, which is twisted and dark and, well, a bit crazy. You can tell how much work, passion and love was put into it. Commonly in point-and-clicks you hear simple lines like, I can't do that, or that doesn't work.
No. 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 No.
But for Edna and Harvey, you actually get a range of different responses depending on what combination you do or how you mess up, which must have taken so much writing and recording.
I prefer my coffee without a mallet if you don't mind.
Really? I'm the total opposite.
Now, 2009 is actually one of my favourite years for gaming as a whole, so pay attention. 2009 saw the release of the Book of Unwritten Tales, which is yet another one of my favourites, and it is also very important to me. Why? Because it's the first point-and-click adventure game I played. A time when it was on sale, I bought it on a whim and played it through. I thoroughly enjoyed the humour, the graphics, the fantasy feel, the gameplay, the story, and as someone who grew up loving stories and video games, it felt very fresh. So this is when I realised the genre was right up my alley, and I was surprised I had not delved into it sooner. The Book of Unwritten Tales was really a great gateway into the genre for me. You can tell it has tons of heart put into it. I really do recommend it, especially if you like the magical, whimsical style of fantasy and humour. It's like jumping straight into a fantasy novel. It's also not too difficult, from what I can remember, anyway. So as you can see, quite a few of my well-loved point-and-clicks are from the 2000s, but the 2000s also meant the rise of console gaming and action, and I think the patience required for point-and-clicks and puzzles especially, it wasn't all too favourable anymore, so the future didn't seem promising. So let's ask the question. How are point-and-clicks doing now? It's the time where reboots, remakes and remasters are aplenty, and nostalgia grabs people's attention like a nice slice of chocolate cake. It's the time where traditional puzzle solving and point-and-click adventures are more prevalent in the indie scene, and episodic games, choices matter games, and quick-time events have been stealing more of the spotlight. Like Until Dawn, Heavy Rain, Life is Strange, and of course The Walking Dead, which I mentioned briefly earlier. Despite some amazing releases, the traditional point-and-click formula, and puzzles especially, really started to struggle. So in the 2010s, it makes a lot of sense that developers turned to Kickstarter and crowdfunding. Such was the case with the colourful game Broken Age from 2014. I really do like Double Fine, and with Tim Schafer, previously LucasArts, being the founder, I'm not surprised. Thimbleweed Park also came to be with a Kickstarter designed by Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick, previously from LucasArts. Of course, there have still been quite a few noteworthy indie releases. In the mid-2010s, Kill Monday Games released Fran Bow, also behind Little Miss Fortune. Now, I find Fran Bow very creepy and scary. The psychological horror is strong with this one. It shows how you really don't need a first-person view and jump scares and pure darkness to creep and scare the crap out of people. The Rusty Lake series also has that ominous and disturbing atmosphere. Sally Face comes to mind, and also the Cat Lady. I only watched someone play the Cat Lady, but it genuinely still left a deep, long-lasting impression on me. I shudder to think back to it. And a company that is still going, fingers crossed, is Wadjet, who have been on the rise for a while with many noteworthy titles from 2006 to today, including the Shiva, Gemini Rue, Resonance, Primordia, A Golden Wake, Technobabylon, and The Excavation of Hobbs Barrow. I really hope they grow even more in scope. Clearly a lot of passion goes into giving players a memorable experience. Especially as well, the pixel style seems to be on the rise with games like Cathy Rain, which is set in the 90s, Norco, which looks stunning, The Case of the Golden Idol, The Drifter, The Crimson Diamond, Lucy Dreaming, and so many more. You know, I could sit here and list a bunch of indie games, so we can certainly recognise and appreciate the fact that there are people out there keeping the genre going. To finish off, I want to mention some really cool handcrafted games, The Dream Machine, Truberbrook and Harold Halibut, and there is also The Neverhood from the 90s as well. They're all so cleverly constructed, you can just admire the scenery, and knowing it's crafted by hand adds to the whimsical nature of playing them. To me, this is the perfect demonstration of what is so wonderful about human creation, the beauty of how we can craft these worlds to share with each other. Feeling the passion behind creativity is truly something special. You know, the point-and-click genre as a whole is so special, and I really hope my video has proved that point. As you can see, the genre is lingering, and it's true, you do need to sit and focus and listen and keep track of your inventory and the puzzles and where to go and the story, and nowadays with humans' focus maybe going a bit down the drain, it's maybe part of why the genre isn't picked up as much as it was initially. But to everyone watching this, see this video as a chance to explore more of the genre yourself. Of course, the gaming industry is always changing and shifting and expanding, and you know, there's a chance point and clicks will come back full force. Who knows? Or perhaps they'll evolve in a different way that we can't foresee. In my humble opinion, there should always be a space held for adventure and puzzle solving, funny and witty dialogue and stories, experimentation, you know, a range of art styles and more. There are so many important and life-changing stories that could be shown and told in this way. So, with that being said, remember to check out some point-and-click adventure games. Check out any that looked interesting in this video or replay a favourite if you have one. Let me know your experience with the genre. And as always, check out my Patreon if you would like to support me. And thank you to my current patrons on there. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.